Very happy to have you all with us here tonight for the third Enterprise 2.0 Digital Workplace, Digital Work Disruption Meetup. So E2O DVD, as Diane once set up the hashtag. So I'm very happy to have this crowd. We have some new participants in the live stream today with Anne, Bartlett, Bragg, and certainly I think there are also some more just listening. Ron is there, but he's not yet on the stream. David is there. So what I defined a little bit as topic for today, I thought, or certainly we had these further interview sessions last week. I had interviewed also Rachel Happ, but before that, we always had in our discussions here and also in our in the interviews, we discussed the importance of leadership within these times. Leadership in terms of managing or enabling the change, but also assuring people in their personal situation that they are now. So I think that these are two sides of the medal that we should discuss. And that's what I thought that might be a good topic for tonight, that we discuss a little bit about leadership. And I asked Jane, because we had this topic of leadership also in the interview with Jane, whether she could present us shortly some excerpts of her research and give us some input as a starting point for our discussions. So, Jane, maybe you can share with us the information, maybe also some slides. I don't know whether you prepared anything at the end.
No slides.
That's fine. It's fine.
I think it's better without slides. I've got a few numbers. I've got some very shocking numbers, numbers that I find personally quite depressing. But they're not new. They're numbers that I've communicated about before. About leadership, the first thing I would like to tell you, I'm going to put a few numbers in here. First in the chat, so we can be easier to follow along. Overall, oh, it's not working. Hang on one second. Overall, my research, I've done research for 10, 12 years now, annually, with about 300-400 organizations each year responding. A number of you are already familiar with this, and some of you have actually participated. The thing that has struck me every year is that leadership in organizations don't enable people to really do what they're capable of doing. I see you're nodding your head, Celine. I think you're a kindred spirit with this. And I've seen it with clients, and I've seen it with these hundreds of companies that I've researched. I'm going to give you just a few numbers here so that you understand where I'm coming from. The first one is actually one of the higher numbers, and that is that in general, according to my research, I asked the question, in your company, can people manage themselves, direct their own work? Would you believe that only 50% of the organizations said yes?
That seems high, right?
That seems high?
You say 15 or 50?
50.
Oh, yeah. I think
what was the question again?
The question was, in general, in your organization, can people self-manage and self-direct their work? I put it over in the chat column, if you can see that, just so you can keep track of it.
I'm going to agree with Dion. I think it's high, weirdly high.
Okay.
In the sense that if it were that high, we would not have many of the problems that we have today. That's simple.
But that also means that in 50% of half the organizations, people cannot self-manage. They cannot direct their work themselves. Which
I would say that it is low. I think there must be a big difference between countries and between cultures. I would expect, but you know better if you have these numbers for Danish or Nordic companies, that it should be higher in my expectation for Nordic countries.
It's also very different depending on the
Are
kind of
these
job,
knowledge workers
kind of
though?
job
or
you
they-
do. If you're on the
Yeah.
shop floor, you have very little chance to self-manage. If you're in a white collar administrative or kind of other position, this is a low number.
Yeah, I'm able to break it down to some extent to the different categories that you've talked about, like countries and white collar and so on. But when you only have, each year I had from 300 to 400 organizations. And so you have to be very careful not to draw conclusions. It's a relatively small population. I mean, it's not thousands of companies around the world. And my research population is a lot of European, Asia in the sense of Australia, New Zealand, and North America, Canada and the United States. Mads, in response to what you said, some time ago, I did do a country breakdown. I forget on which question now, but Denmark came out as the highest country. I can send you that link. I don't remember what the question was, but it had to do with the freedom of people to do certain things.
Yeah. It's to say, I would love to see that link, because that's also my impression. And I think Denmark is high, Sweden, Norway is also high, but even between the three countries, there are major differences in culture.
Yeah, I have occasion to work. I've worked in Norway, I've worked in Sweden, and I've worked in Denmark over the years. And my own personal experience shows that there's a lot more individual freedom than, for example, in France, the country where I live. And so anyway, let me go on and give you another number here.
Yes.
Here we go, hang on. This one, well, maybe you will tell me this is high too, Dion. I'd like to know what you think. Hang on. So the question here was, in your organization, are people encouraged to give input to business goals and to challenge the business model and work practices? In other words, it's one step further towards, I would say, emancipation of the worker. The first question was, can they manage themselves? And now we're talking about, can they actually give input and challenge things that are happening in the organization? Of course, we dropped there to 40%. Any reactions to that?
That seems really high to me.
Yeah.
I don't know too many workers who would be prepared to stand up and go, you know what, this business model is just stuffed. I just can't see that. I mean, and also, I know you're not doing Asia as in Southeast Asia, but if you get into Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, would be zero.
Yeah, I do not have survey participation. Interestingly, the first year, I think in 2006 or 7, I had a lot of people from Japan. I gave them the copy of the free report, like every participant gets, and no one from Japan came back the second year. I thought that was that meant that was a statement about something. And I had a good contact in Japan who helped me, but she was not able to do anything about it. And so what I really need is someone based over there, someone like Maish from Pebble Road or someone like that who can actually extend it further.
Yeah, it's not safe for them. They would be very wary that if whatever they said might be used and they might lose their jobs. It's culturally, they won't share that sort of thing.
Maybe that we have also a systematic issue in the data, as certainly you are addressing always people from the digital workplace sphere, which are already quite involved in this initiative. And this is not maybe the representative with the whole set of companies and whole set of organizations.
That's true, Bjorn. Although each question, I'm very careful to say, I'm not saying to you, do you personally as a survey participant feel free to blah, 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 blah. I'm saying the question is always carefully phrased, do people in your organization feel free to blah, 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 blah. Of course, again, it's the opinion of the person. I mean, I have always emphasized the fact that my research work is self-assessment, and it's people expressing what they think is the case in their organizations.
I just can say about the German companies that I know also as participants on stage at our conferences. You have those people like Harald Schirmer, who are at Continental really advanced, but certainly if you would ask somebody else in Continental in some other positions, they would probably say, well, we cannot say that Continental itself in a whole is already 50% self-determined work and self-organized work. So maybe this is always a different perspective.
Absolutely.
But I find, if I can add something else, I find that number very low, or there are a whole bunch of hypocrites out there, right? And I will explain what I mean with that. I think that over the last decade, we have seen how hundreds, if literally not thousands of organizations have said that they organize massive online collaboration, innovation jams, where they get people together for a short period of time to throw ideas and to share things that they like, they don't like about how organizations work and see what happens with that kind of input, where they get extrapolate different ideas on how things happen at work, of what they like or they don't like. And I have seen, seriously, I have seen a lot of people, I'm going to say here, show off that they're doing that kind of thing. So I'm expecting to have that number in the 80, 90%, or they're lying, literally, because have we stopped asking employees about how the company is going? I don't think we have. Have we stopped running employee surveys? I don't think we have. Have we stopped monitoring, and monitoring in the sense of watching what happens on the internal enterprise social networking tools to see what is the sentiment and the feeling of how people are working? I don't think we have. So I'm surprised that that number is not higher. Seriously.
Well, but it's very specific about input to business goals and business model, not just how you feel about the company culture or in general the direction the company is going. That's a very different.
Yeah, but don't you think that if something would, don't you think that, Catherine, don't you think that if something would be broken, that they would openly express that in a place where they're running those online events that most of the times are even anonymous to capture everyone's feedback? At least that's how they have been framing them.
I think many companies are making more conscious efforts to invite. I mean, it's not new. It started with, the quality circles and that kind of thing. So there's lots of efforts in trying to get input from employees up to a point. When it starts challenging the power structures or the rituals, or what I think touching on power is a very clear limit, an unsaid limit. It's very it's a tacit limit, and those who do it consciously or unconsciously get very often kicked out of the system.
Yeah, but we have so I agree with that, because we have seen that we collect that feedback, we open up the room to share those ideas, and what most organizations then don't do about it, nothing, right? So nothing happens, and then at that point, that's when things stagnate, and people just basically say, "Oh, that's lovely." Once again, you're open to listen to what I had to say, but then you refuse to do anything about it.
Let me give you just a few more numbers.
Should be higher. Yeah, go ahead.
Because what I think we want to do, I've got two more things to share with you. I think what Bjorn wants to do today is, based on this input and your reactions and your experiences, see what we as a group can do. Tell me if I'm right, Bjorn, what we as a group can do to try to influence leadership, especially in the context that we're all living in right now. So the next number I want to share with you is the one I just put up. When the question I asked was, are people empowered to act, to reinvent work, including shortcutting processes in order to advance more rapidly? And there, of course, it drops down to 25% say yes, which I find high, because I know in most organizations, process is king. And you don't not follow processes. And I deliberately in that question put in, can you shortcut processes in order to advance more rapidly? And 25% said yes. The last number I want to show you is one that I have followed now for, I think it's been 5 years. And that involves our senior management in general. The question is your senior management open and participatory? Stop laughing, Luis. Are they?
I'm sorry. It beats me.
They have 5 degrees of answer. You've got open and participatory, somewhat open and participatory, don't know, somewhat command and control, and command and control. And so you have these 5 degrees to answer, and less than 20%, and that's been the number since 2013, every year, say that their senior management is open and participatory. If I add the somewhat open and participatory, it sort of doubles. But we're still at a point, and this is what strikes me, and this is what actually triggered a lot of my work that I can't share with you tonight because it's not appropriate, but it started my work on the gig mindset inside organizations, because I saw this low level of leadership, the low level of work culture, yet individuals have such high capabilities now thanks to digital things. And there's a huge gap in organizations between what people can do, what they want to do, and what the system lets them do.
Jane, can I ask what is reported in the other extreme, command and control?
Excuse me? What is?
The command and control, what's that number?
So I can't hear you.
The command and control, what is that percentage?
The command and control is, well, I don't have it right here. Command and control, the total command and control is lowish. It's like it ranges from 10 to 15%. And then when you go the somewhat command and control, it increases to maybe 25% or a third, depending on the year.
So the distribution seems still, it's binomial. So the I don't know, it seems to be the largest in the middle, and everything else is.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I was looking at that today, Ron, and I could saw that the top 2 levels and the middle level and the bottom 2 roughly are similar.
Okay.
And in 2018, the open and participatory leadership went up a little bit. I'll be happy, anyone who wants to see these numbers in detail, I'll be happy to share them with you if you just drop me an email. The last thing I want to say is something having worked so long in the digital workplace space, I can't put up the chart because it won't go into the chat, but I asked a question about trust. And I asked people how, in your organization, again, I repeated always that same thing, in your organization, in your opinion, how much trust is there between people and their close colleagues? How much trust is there between other workers they don't know, between themselves and local management, and themselves and global management? And then I broke it down into the enterprises that had high digital maturity, which a certain number, maybe 15, 20, at the most 25% of the organizations had high digital maturity. And they have a much higher degree of trust in the organization with management and with colleagues they've never met. The organizations that are less mature digitally have a lower level of trust. And for me, that's an avenue that's worth exploring today, now that we are in a situation where everybody's working digitally. Are there ways that we can help organizations see how they can increase trust and how they can deal with some of the ways of enabling people to take more initiatives and be validated in what they do?
Well, and the essence of that trust and the digital maturity, to me, that it's great to have trust, but what does trust also transfer to? And that is an ability maybe to share knowledge more freely, to collaborate in a more open and trustful environment.
To contradict, raise other options, contribute.
Yeah, right, and then just the capability maybe for a more diverse pool of workers to collaborate and possibly innovate. So, sort of there's this spectrum of what might happen, but I think it's really exciting that you kind of correlated trust and digital maturity that way.
I have a question for the group. Do you think that the pressure for short-term results is one of the forces that goes against being open and participatory, because it takes more time, to involve more, to listen more, to etc. And in the current context, due to the crisis and to emerging enormous issues, will that may this trend be even reinforced? And do you think the crisis we're in could possibly reduce further the amount of collaboration, participation, etc., in mindset in senior management?
I think absolutely. The quarterly profit cycles create a laser-like focus on near term to the exclusion of long term, and you want to have as much profit as you can, so you minimize long-term investment. And it's not been lost on people that those who flouted the stock market, like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, and have invested long term, even at great penalty to their stock price, are doing the best, right? They're the ones that they can have long-term plans, they can thrive. So I think my take is that we'll see it cut both ways. We'll either go hyper near term, or we'll realize we can't continue this way, that we won't survive if we have more disruptions like this, unless we're more resilient, and this will be perceived as a survival factor. So I think it's going to cut both ways. I don't know I'm interested to see what those buckets turn out when we look back in the rearview mirror at all this, but that's my take.
So we'll have a big divide in the companies. And following up also our discussion from last time, maybe we have those who are already advanced, they get that are already more mature on this digital way of working, they get better along, and they get this long-term perspective. And those who are just following up, they get more this hyper core short perspective, as you said, Dan.
But don't you guys think that after during these times that extraordinary times that we're living through or whatever, that plenty of employees are going to question a lot of the organizations that they work with based on how they have reacted to the pandemic, based on how they have been looked after, and based on how much of flexibility and freedom to cope they have been given? Because I keep hearing of the last 2 weeks since we met last time, that a lot of folks are actually thinking twice about whether they would continue to work in that organization because of how they have been mistreated during these times. And I think that that's going to reflect in a sense of for organizations to try to find their own reckoning in terms of saying, what do I want to do? Do I want to go with the good old model that I had before, where we all know where we ended up? Or do I want to build something else? Because I think that because a lot of people are going to question, I don't want to work for an organization that treats me like that, because I know that there's going to be another one coming up, whatever the catastrophe is. And I need to go for an organization or work for an organization that not only enables me digitally, but also understands me as a human being that suffers through these anxiety periods or whatever else. I'm seeing a lot of that at the moment. I don't know everyone else if you guys have been hearing about it.
I want to chime in. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that amplifying, I totally agree with you, Lewis, and also amplifying what Dion said about the focus on the quarter and the numbers. I was reminded of a book by Richard Rumble called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy today, that there are so many organizations where when you actually ask them what their strategy is, it's actually all based around numbers. It's not based around things that they need to do, problems that they've got to sort out, and for what they need to do about it. It's all to do with being the market leader, or increasing sales by 20%, or it's all based around numbers, and it's just ludicrous. That's not a strategy, and we haven't got enough companies who really understand the business that they're in.
I wanted to point something out is do we have the luxury? The closest scenario to the world economy and what we have now is like, for the US, the Great Depression. In that time, people weren't worried about, what is the conditions of my job? They were worried about, do I have a job? Do I have income? There's a lot of industries where there's no change, but there's just as many industries where massive layoffs. No one has a job. You can't get a job. You're just starving for, literally you are starving to get a job. So even after this thing is over, there is still, a large number of unemployment. Like in the US, we've had record layoffs, and unemployment numbers is around 6 million, right?
22 million people have lost their job in the United States.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
And in comparison, right, you know, the largest numbers before that was well under 1 million. 600,000 was a previous record. So
Right.
with that number, right, a lot of people aren't thinking about what are my conditions at work. They're just thinking about, can I get food? Can I pay my rent? So that doesn't really allow for that scenario.
I'm gonna disagree with that for a minute. I think that right now, especially for those countries where the situation is the direst, it's, am I gonna be alive in X amount of time, right? Because the safety of the employee, whatever the job is, comes first. And I agree with you that people will need to put food on the table and pay their bills and everything else. But if that means risking their life and the lives of their loved ones, I bet you that the moment that they can escape that environment, they will, right? And also, I was going to say that obviously we cannot compare the situation, I would say, because, you know, there are different times that we live in, right? But I think that what we want to have to do collectively is to think, what do we want to do with the so-called economy, right? In terms of we know where we have gotten it to the current state. So what do we want to do? It's a choice that we need to make. And I mentioned this on Celine's post about the choice that we need to make as to whether we will continue with the good old normal that we had before, or whether we would want to build a new normal, whatever that is. And if there is a new normal, nothing of what we have done in the past will work to what we want to that new normal. So we're all starting from scratch.
Well, I don't disagree that people are worried about their personal safety before that, but you know, if it hasn't happened for a lot of people, this is the tendency, is that, so okay, it hasn't happened, but food and bills and all of those and economic starvation, that's a real factor regardless of the dangers of it. And at a certain point you say, well, to heck with it, I need a job, otherwise we're not going to be able to do and live the way we are. But I also agree, Luis, that, you know, once things return to normal, we don't know what that is. That could be 1 year, that could be 2 months. They will say like, all right, the conditions here just suck. I'm going to move. So there's going to be another shift back then. Sorry, go ahead, Catherine.
No, I just wanted to bring it back just for a minute to the moment when Jane shared this trust and digital maturity. In my recent experience over the last 5 to 7 years, as companies have embarked on a quote unquote digital transformation journey, they have rolled out all kinds of technology in terms of the cloud and accessibility to content, accessibility to one another, collaboration, social networking capabilities. A lot of it, there's been tremendous investment in the technology, but not the kind of investment in transforming the experience of the worker. There's all of these waves of improving the employee experience, but I do not see, and your numbers, Jane, really bears this out, that the management culture perceives it, the possibility. So it's all embedded in the same old mindset, the same old kind of constructs of communication flows. And so I think that you're almost seeing this now, the same behaviors, the same models, the same mindsets being transferred into a remote experience, as a lot of knowledge workers at least are able to work remotely. So I'm wondering, even though there's this sort of disruption, this sharpness, how could we think about building these sort of mindset capabilities? Are managers just going to be functioning the same way, but remotely?
Well, here's an interesting thing. Mark just shared on the chat some interesting studies that have been done in France, where 62% of the French people asked would work remotely, right?
Continue to work remotely.
Would continue to work remotely. This is France. Like in Spain and Italy, we thrive on the face-to-face, let's go to the office because we have a culture of presentism. Be there or be a square, right? And to me, that's a huge percentage already. And the longer that it will continue, the higher it will become. I think that people are getting used now to the idea that once things are a little bit more contained, that the stress disappears, the anxiety disappears, and then they start discovering that working distributedly is actually not as bad as we have been told over the years, because now we have the technologies, and all of a sudden working distributedly, we have the opportunity to become a lot more flexible, a lot more understanding of what's going on there and how I can contribute more. And I can see that already in my own country as well, in Spain, where before, talking about teleworking or distributed work was a taboo word. It was actually forbidden. Hardly any organization. I was a weird one. I've been doing that for 18 years now, and everyone was saying, "Oh yeah, you work on the beach." I said, "Yeah, sure, of course. That's why I'm so white, right?" But anyway, so you can see how these times are slowly, and I'm saying that how time plays in our favor. That the longer that we're in confinement, the more people that would adjust to that new kind of mindset, if you want to call it, because of that. And countries that traditionally were seeing as very strong face-to-face culture, they're shifting and really quick, right? And actually then we correlate it to what's happening, for instance, in other countries like the Nordics, where working distributedly has been pretty much the norm over the last decade or two. And that's why when you look into the pandemic statistics, right, they are relatively lower compared to what's happening in the South European countries, for instance. So people are not stupid. They go and think, hang on for a second, I can have my own space where I can contribute and do work with the digital tools that I have available. So why would I want to go back to the office, right? And I'm not saying that it will be like Monday till Friday, but I think that we're going to see a lot of people who are going to say, I want to be at the office 2 days a week, and then the other 3 days at home. I think that people are going to start with that. And as soon as things continue to settle down, I think it's going to go full blown into working from home.
And Luis, then we get into the problem with management, because I've worked with a lot of French companies, and a lot of the reasons, I can see a smile over there, a lot of the reasons people do not work remotely is because management does not trust them. Management does not want them to work remotely. And I've worked with some of very big, advanced French organizations, and there's this suspicion and lack of trust when it comes to working remotely. And I think that's something we as a group need to address.
But I think that's changing now. Yeah. Like I was working with a group of managers a week or so back, and the trust thing came up and the surveillance technologies, and they were all horrified. But what they were saying around the trust is that they had to learn to adapt that in the home environment at the moment. This isn't normal remote working. This is remote working in confined spaces. Certainly here in Spain, you know, we're in small spaces with lots of people and just sharing spaces. There's dogs, there's children, and to Celine's point, you know, there's all this stuff you have to do. But what they were saying is they're becoming overwhelmed by their role as counsellors, how they're trying to support their team who are anxiety and all the issues, the sort of personal issues. And they said that one girl was just so overwhelmed that she was almost in tears, that she couldn't take any more phone calls from her team and spend half an hour trying to counsel them through the anxiety they're having. She said, what about me? I'm not a psychologist. I can't get my work done, and it makes them feel better, but I'm not. So she felt there needs to be a complete culture change around that. Now, it is different times, but it's just getting so complicated for them. They're overwhelmed and just can't see the way forward.
I think we all can agree that leadership takes a critical role in this whole change process. But the question for me is whether you are right, Luis, at that point that the period of the confinement and the people are getting used to this new kind of working is already enough that the leaders are changing their mind. And for me, it's the question: how can we support the change of mindset on the leadership side to really make sure that we reach out to this new state, to this new normal that we all envision at this point?
Well, to me, what is key, and this is something that before we didn't have, right? So those of us, we've been involved with ESNs and everything else for 10, 15 years. And the vast majority of times, our managers and everyone else's managers, they have always been working from the office. So we were always remote to them, right? So have spoke relationship where I need to report back to my manager kind of thing, right? What I think is different now is that everyone is working from home. So even the managers themselves, they're exposed to the same issues, the same anxieties that we may have, because I mean, we're saying that managers don't trust their employees, but do the employees trust their managers that are going to be working effectively from home just as much as we do? That's the same valid question. It's a two-way here, right? Before that wasn't there, but now it is, because everyone is getting their own skin in the game about how everyone is working in this way distributedly. And believe me, I'm 100%, and I haven't done any research on this, but I'm 100% that those leaders who have been understanding what it is like working distributedly versus just trying to carry on as if they were from the office with all of this obsession with meetings, virtual meetings. I tell you that deep secretly, they're waiting to go back to the office for their employees to then tell them that they want to work from home, because they would want to also want to work from home, right? Because of a number of various different things. That's why I keep telling people that we're entering distributed work, not remote work, right? Where everyone is distributed in terms of the work that we contribute to everyone and how we work in networks and communities. So to Bjorn's question, how would you support that? We have got a whole bunch of people. I have been saying this in the previous meetings. We have a whole bunch of champions, ambassadors, advocates, whatever, who have been doing this forever. We need to get them as close as possible to the managers and leaders to show them and hand them over, you know, hand in hand, to walk them through what it is like entering this brave new world where you don't see anyone or anything and you need to blindly trust that they will do the job, just like we have been doing over the decades, right? I think that that's one good way of how we could approach them. And the other thing is that I would expose them, literally. I will openly ask them, hey, how's it working from home for you? Share some tips of how you do it. Get exposed to it. You know, I think, you know, on the chat, I mentioned what I would want managers for me to be is more humane, no more human, more humane, because that implies everything. It implies open, empathic, listener, good, well-hearted, because they're all on that. They always look for the good of the people, right?
We're talking
the moment
about,
that they see that.
Sorry.
No, go ahead, Celine.
Yeah, no, we're talking about distributed work, and I think we need to help leaders move further than that and go to and really implement distributed cognition. One of their important responsibilities, even before COVID, was to bring around the table, to notice who's not around the table that needs to be, because they are impacted by decisions. And it makes, I mean, this responsibility is maybe even more complicated today, because when they were going to an office, at least, you know, everybody was under the same roof, sort of, and leaders could go on the shop floor, they could talk with people if they wanted to, if they made this effort. Now everybody is distributed, everybody is remote, and it's very, very easy to forget those people who are not on Zoom calls, on videos or behind their screens. How do we help leaders be really aware and make deliberate efforts to reach out, include all those people, put the people around the table, you know, the virtual table?
I think I agree with a lot of you. This is not just, are we going this way or that way? I think we're going both ways. There are some companies, some employees that will take the advantage of this clearness about virtual remote working, and some will be maybe lost if they're not taken into this new area. So it'll go both ways. But what I think could be very interesting is in the next half year or 1 year, lots of things will change, and it wouldn't go like this overall. It would be very different from country to country and from company to company. So I think it could, and maybe it's a question to you, Jane. Could it be possible to make a short version of your survey, just 5 or 10 questions, and then try to get it up in May, in September, and in November to 50 Danish, 50 Swedish, 50 French companies, just to follow this, because I think right now everybody is in shock. And in Denmark, I would say that the companies or the employees that are used to work remotely, they say, oh, well, nice. Now everybody is working like me and we are more equal. But I guess there are a lot of people that are anxious, and also managers. Some managers are good at this. Oh, we trust you. We take a beer Friday afternoon, everybody. But there are also lots of managers that are very uncertain about this. And I think they have dreams at night when we go back to normal. So I really think in the next 6 months, lots of things will change, and it could be so interesting to monitor a little bit how it's changed in different
I think that's a brilliant observation, Mats, just because you're right. This is sort of the shock, and everybody's just in the scramble mode to get everything just working and connected and some semblance of the work that they used to do. But for all intents and purposes, it looks like this could be a 12 to 18 month scenario with only, you know, slight blips of quote unquote return to normalcy. And so what happens when this becomes more baked in as a set of behaviors? Can we help them even at this moment begin to think about new opportunities and start baking in some other perspectives? Because, you know, the digital transformation isn't just the digital stuff, it's the modalities, you know, it's the being able to be your own agent on a network. And when the network is the company and outside of the company, but managers don't see that, leaders don't see that. So how can we help leaders empower their workers through the tools they've already invested in, right? They have many of these tools, but they are treating, like Simon Terry said in a blog yesterday, you know, it's like they're digital cubes now. The way they're being, you know, the reinforcement of the traditional model.
Mads, I think the idea that you suggested is very interesting. My survey that I did every year was approximately 100 questions. In order, this little sliver of information I gave you is a small part. And I think, and to get it down to something really interesting for what you're talking about, we need to get it down to like 10 or 12 questions. And if this group can come up with 10 or 12 questions, I have the whole infrastructure to get it up and give you all a link that you can then send out to the people you know.
I was going to pose just one such question, actually. And I was going to ask Jane if you already have this in what you do, which is, we often ask, like, from management levels down to managers, at the managers, as well as to employees, do you help your employee manage change, how they handle change, and vice versa to the employee? Is your manager helping you handle change? How do you navigate that? How do you, react to it? So that is a sensing, and it's actually a very vague question as well. I would say, it's like, what does that mean? What does it mean to navigate through change or, cope with it? So, yeah, but at the same time, it's a different perspective than, hey, are you executing on processes? Are you being able to suggest new things? It is more about your ability to handle with, whether it's COVID or if it's any situation, there's change going on. There's always change in the business. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, in doing this kind of survey, a fundamental question we have to decide, which I had to face over my 10 years of research, is, are we addressing people to speak in the name of their organization, or are we addressing people to speak as individuals? And it's a very different, sorry?
As organization, I would say, yeah.
It's a very different question. Yeah, it's a very different question because people can express themselves how they see it, or they can express how their organization sees it. And obviously that's more approximate than how they see it as individuals. But doing it on an individual basis, you need to get, I don't know, dozens, if not 50 or 60 from an organization. And that becomes a question of managing all that data and comparing an organization in Denmark to Spain. And we're in a whole dimension there that personally is a little bit beyond what I would have time to do right now. And I'm not sure we would get what we want out of it.
Could you get them to describe their scenario, their workplace scenario, like their workplace, whether it's like what it is, how chaotic it is? Just get like snapshots of what's worked like for you now. So get descriptions versus asking questions. And from those snapshots at points in time, you're going to create a sort of mosaic of experience that you can make sense of from that. So rather than ask a question, which they'll sort of give you distorted answers, just a paragraph on what's your situation like now. And then we get emotional stuff out of it. You'll get control type items, framing it in that way. Just those snapshots, photographs, like digital, I don't know, like footprints of what has been happening for people. From backgrounds to...
One comment is I'm collecting screenshots from intranets to see how they use intranets in these COVID-19 times as a crisis communication. And I would say I see in lots of intranets they're having this show your home office. So actually a lot of companies are exchanging pictures, videos, comments where they describe how their home office is and how it is working there. So this kind of investigation, it's out there. I would say that it would be difficult to get this kind of impressions collected because it's a huge amount and people have to show their private settings. Actually, you come into their home showing it. So I would.
They've already done that in their Zoom chats with their friends. A few people were saying, well, I actually revealed a lot more about myself than I usually do. And I'm not sure I'm okay with it, but I've had to do it because we have to have Zoom meetings. And now they know I've got a 3-year-old sitting under the desk or I've got this or that. And it was a really interesting challenges culturally that I've overshared what I used to have that line, this is my personal life, this is my work life. I think even that's really interesting. So that's going to change culturally.
Well, you know, on the first event that we did, I mentioned how there are two ways of how we can see today's times, right? The tactical way of, you know, how can I handle this when I'm in the crisis mode, right? So try to cope best as you can. But then the other thing that I mentioned was to have a specific team that will do exactly that, and that will go throughout the entire digital tool suite and start capturing stories, practices, anecdotes, whatever it is, of things that work and things that don't work, so that when things settle down, that team can come back and say, hey, we noticed that this worked, this didn't work. So when you start thinking about how you move forward, you're not sort of like starting from scratch in terms of saying, here's how we do things, but it's more, here's what we have observed that has worked really well and what didn't, and then implement it and developed it as part of that digital workplace, right? I think that that's one of the things that people can do quite easily right now. Again, resorting into that list of champions, because they're basically everywhere. They're spread. They have got very powerful networks internally, and they can gather around and start, you know, mobilizing their networks to collect that input and then share it in whatever form, you know, whether it's audio, video, text, whatever it is, and then keep curating those practices, if you want to call it, because those are the ones that are going to basically say, okay, now that this is over and it is more or less under control and we go into that brave new normal, here are the things that have worked really well that we should continue promoting. And the ones that didn't, let's try to figure out if we can do something about it, right? That's one of the things that I keep telling and advising people about as one of the ways that you can generate that awareness of what it is like going through these crisis times, because most of the organizations, they don't look into it. They just keep going in full throttle to try to recover as quick as they can. And they missed out on all of these goodies that can be happening. So.
Well, you know, Diane asked a good question in the chat, like what advice would we give to leaders specifically in this time? A lot of the things we've talked about will also track well to just, you know, your garden variety knowledge worker working from home. But what in the terms of leadership would we offer guidance for? I always, even before this, one of the things I suggested is that leaders need to walk the digital walk in ways that they either don't at all or very lightly. And, you know, there's some ways that I think of to help guide them. But what do other people think about the advice to leaders during this time?
I would have one advice related to diversity of thoughts, as in reference to my earlier comment. Pay attention to, it's going to be tempting to narrow down our focus and our circle, the circle of people we talk to. You see, you can't be 200 around a Zoom call. So, but there are other tools that enable that. And leaders need to be helped, supported a little bit to make that effort. It takes more energy, more effort to listen up, to open up to other voices, and keep expanding your cognition horizons. And it's hard because some people are purely not equipped, not well equipped through tools or skills, and yet leaders need to reach out and make sure they are nurtured or fed by a diversity of perspectives. So that would be my advice.
I have a similar thing. I think part of it, there's a shift. In this time, there's a tendency that we need to plan what to happen across all the people. But I think leaders need to spend just as much time to move to a sensing mode. What is actually happening out there? Spend more time on sensing and gathering information than on setting plans of what to do. The plan should be based on what do you sense happening around there. So you need instruments. You need instruments, mechanisms to ask people across your organization, because it's not just ask your local leadership, but this is get it down to all the levels of your organization. What can you do? And it's going to be differences in different places. So focus on sensing what is going on and how people are reacting, as well as how a processes reacting to the situation. Versus setting plans.
I think what you guys, both Celine and Ron, are saying is that leaders should eventually step away and stop being the center of everything, as if they are the center of the world and everything goes around them. Be a node, be part of the network, and in that sense mode of watch out what people are doing, listen, talk to other folks, participate in the conversations openly and everything else. So eventually what we're saying here is stop being the center and become part of the edges like everyone else is. And in that, I agree on that. I agree on that. And I love that use of the word of becoming sensors, because what happens is that they can reach to the farther corners or the farther edges of anyone in the organization. And who knows, maybe it's someone all of a sudden now with these digital tools has got the opportunity to come forward and present the idea that will be the killer idea for the business for the 21st century. You never know where that talent is. So if you move yourself away and you let people trust people blindly, start with 100%, and then depending on how people react, you can reduce it or not. But step away and start sensing what's going on in there. That will give you an opportunity to make probably more informed and better decisions over the course of time. So that's great advice. Thank you, guys.
Great. I mean, it's also 2 minutes to 8, so we have to finish a thing again. Actually, we didn't really, in the last meters, we addressed a little bit the opening questions I had, but still, I think it's a very certainly a very complicated situation that we're in. I mean, we have the normal team members that are in a change process. We have the leaders in a change process. We have different organizations on different maturity levels and different change process. And we have this whole complex economic situation outside of the companies, which are changing, and actually probably nobody can really make a good prediction what is going to be what's the right way to get out of this. So, I mean, that's probably the whole problem also for us in the discussions, that we cannot address a clear answer to this complex question at this point. Maybe we'll follow up again. I mean, as I was also not quite following up the call from Diane at last time, that we maybe work on this document a little bit further that you also mentioned in the chat. and that we go a little bit further to to be more concrete in all our recommendations at this point. Thank you for participating.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, nice to see you all.
See you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.